Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Let us know in the, oh, good. Let us know. I know it's early on a Wednesday morning, and I thank you for joining us this early, and there might be folks who come in. For those of you, and you can share this with other people, we are recording this, so folks can watch from the beginning later. So you're at the session that's recruiting for a diverse candidate pool. My name is Megan Matthews. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director for Washington State's Office of Equity. We have I have two amazing co-presenters who you'll hear from a little bit later. Michaela Doelman, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Office of Financial Management, and Marissa Van Hooser, who is the Chief of Operations Officer for the Department of Commerce. At this point, we're not really going to be doing a lot of Q&A, but when we stop throughout the presentation, feel free to ask your questions then, and we'll be glad to provide more support. Oh, before I move the slide, I just want to give a little brief introduction. The Office of Equity is here to support agencies in systems change. What that means is that we have to fundamentally change the way we operate. So I've been a state employee for over 15 years now. And in my experience, what we do is, well, we'll change a little, tweak this here, tweak that there. Well, that's no longer how we're going to be operating. We are doing significant fundamental foundational changes because we have to meet the complicated and complex problems of the 21st century if we are going to continue to be a government of, for, and by the people, and a government and where people feel heard there and everyone has the same or equitable opportunities to the power, resources, and opportunities they need to be successful. So this recruitment, our hiring and onboarding process is so important to these opportunities because the way we shape our process determines who gets through. Little decisions you make along the way will create barriers for others and create access or favor for some. And so I want you to be understanding as you're making decisions, how can you make decisions that broaden the candidate pool and make it easier for folks to participate throughout the entire process so that at the end we're able to bring on folks who reflect the beautiful diversity of Washington State and who can help us shape government in a way that operates in an equitable and a justice and a just way. So big one, we're going to talk about position descriptions. This is the very beginning part of the hiring process, because from the position description is based, you base the job announcement, you base who you are looking for to fill the positions, what skills, what competencies you're looking for. And so it's critical in this role that you're already thinking about who is the person that we want to fill this role. And so that's why we started here. So we're looking at, after you've got your title, the what you want done, you're looking at, well, what are the requirements of the position that we do want? Typical job requirements, we have a lot of certifications, degrees, years of experience. And I called these ones out because these are examples from Office of Equity actual position descriptions. So the first one on the left column, typical job requirements. We've got the Certified Diversity Practitioner or Executive, CDP or CDE requirement or ability to obtain certifications within the first 6 months of hire. So that is a barrier. And also, why is it a barrier? It's a barrier because who has access to getting those certifications? When you think about, so I used to work at DSHS, the Department of Social and Health Services, and we had, and still have, a program for folks to obtain their CDP and CDE. And DSHS has 17,000, 18,000 people. The cohorts, I think, were about 20 to 30 people. and you had maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 a year, because it's a lot of effort to train a program. So going through that, when you're thinking about the amount of people in your agency, but then the minimal amount of slots that are available, that's access, right? Who has access to have those opportunities and who doesn't? So oftentimes in our agencies, we'll say, okay, well, who do we want to have it, right? The leadership will meet and they'll talk about who do we want to have, participate in this program. So if you're not doing it through the state, you could do it on your own, right? How much does that program cost on your own? About 15, well, maybe 1,500 or 5,000. I can't remember which program I'm thinking about right now. That's $1,500 or 5,000. Either one of those is a lot. And a lot of money in that would create a barrier for people to be able to do it on their own. And it creates a barrier for folks who are trying to go through the program through their agency. So now, not all degree requirements are bad, right? Sometimes you have to have them. What are you, when you're thinking about certifications, um, what is the outcome that you want? What does someone with a CDP or CDE have that somebody else who didn't go through that program have? So think about that, right? Why are we asking for that certification? And not that it's not important. I just want to say it's not like it's not a good program, right? When you have this as a requirement, what is the skill or competency that you're trying to obtain? And I asked that question because if maybe we can write it in a way that gets to the outcome, so that folks have other ways to demonstrate that they have whatever it is you're trying to get. When we have a certification requirement like this, it makes it easier for us to screen people, right? But it doesn't mean that we're screening for the people that we want to fill that job. So just be thinking about that. And on the other side, I have an example of maybe an outcomes-based job requirement, right? What are we trying to achieve? So for the outcomes-based, I put a demonstrated commitment to social and racial justice issues and fundamental understanding of the historical context underlying current challenges facing communities of color, people with disabilities, immigrant communities, queer and transgender communities, as well as low and moderate income families. Thank you. Excuse me. So a demonstrated commitment, right? So now when you have that in a job a requirement, it's on the candidate applying for the position to demonstrate or explain to you how they meet that requirement, versus the first bullet says, here's how you have to meet that requirement, right? So the outcomes based is what we're trying to achieve. That first bullet on the left column is our attempt to make sure people have that. But is that the only way we could have that outcomes-based requirement, or we could meet that outcomes-based requirement? Maybe not, right? Someone can use lived experience to talk about how they have demonstrated commitment to social and racial justice issues. Somebody could use job experience, professional experience, things like that. So, so think about that. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. So the second bullet, we're just gonna move right to the second bullet. A bachelor's degree from an accredited university in the communications, social sciences, social work, public health, applied statistics, or closely related field, paid professional work in one of these areas may substitute year for the education requirement. Lived experience from one or more historically marginalized communities may substitute year for the education requirement. So this is a big one here. We have used degrees as a way to screen, or for us, I think part of the outcome was to try to get at a critical thinking competency. But degrees are a huge barrier. Just like everything I said that when I talked about the certification applies to the degree. Who has access to get a degree? Degrees are expensive, right? In our country, we're dealing with student loan debt, right? And do we forgive it? Do we not? People shouldn't, they went to college and it's on them, blah, 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 right? So we're having a whole discussion. And the problem, a couple of things with the bachelor's degree is most of our jobs don't pay enough for folks who have the degrees because of the debt they've incurred. So when people go through college, undergrad and graduate school and further, our jobs, the jobs that we're posting for that have these requirements don't often pay enough for people who need to then pay their student loan debt, right? And because of access, who can afford to go to college, who understands how to navigate the college process, not everyone has those opportunities. But does it mean that someone with a degree can do the job better than somebody without a degree? Because that's what we're saying with this requirement, that if you have a degree, we believe that you can do this job. If you don't, you can't. But is that true? Is that true? Now, there are some jobs that we have that require a certificate, a degree in the class, in the the class specs, right? But I would challenge you that unless that says required, don't add it as a job requirement. If it says desired, I think in the class specs it says desired, recommended. Don't include a bachelor's degree or any kind of degree requirements in your position descriptions. And it's not enough. So in this example I have, it says paid professional work or lived experience can substitute year for year. It doesn't really matter, because when people see that degree requirement, they automatically assume that you are hiring for a degree and that they're going to be more towards the bottom of the candidate pool because they don't have it. So it's already discouraging people from applying for the jobs. So I would say we would ask that you not include degrees as requirement. You can put it in the desired if you want section of the of your position descriptions, but don't include that as the a requirement of the job, unless, as I said before, it's required in the class specs. And we'll be dealing with that later from an HR perspective. Just want you to know that's going to. We're really looking at creating equitable and just Washington State as an employer. And so we really have to look at those things that favor some. Now, our whole process is favor, right? When we talk about bias, bias is not a bad word in itself, as long as you're aware of what your biases are and they're getting you the outcomes that you need. So we've talked about mitigating bias, things like that. Part of the thing is we're not even aware of how our processes are expressing bias. And that's part of the problem. We have to understand where we are creating bias, and maybe it's the bias we want, right? On the left-hand column, when I say a demonstrated commitment to social and racial justice issues, that's a bias. I'm saying this is what I'm requiring. That is a bias. It's a favor for someone who's doing this, because I believe that if you have this demonstration, this outcomes-based competency, you can help the Office of Equity do a job that we're trying to enact. So we're going to be working on just for, oh, the camera's going all over the place. The camera. Sorry about that, y'all. We are working on a more formalized process on addressing degrees, but I just want to call that out specifically in this presentation, that remove degree requirements from your jobs wherever possible. And then the last thing is, so at the bottom, the third bullet is 3 years experience creating results-driven frameworks that measure outcomes for individuals, children, families, and communities that are demographically and geographically disaggregated. So, and I want to focus on the years. So why 3 years? Why not 5 years? Why not 10 years? What does the number of years that we put in guarantee us, right? When we're talking about job requirements, that you're saying that if you have this, we believe that you're going to be able to do this job. So why 3 years? If you're putting in your job requirements that you want a certain amount of years doing something, I would ask you why. And oftentimes for me, it's been, well, that's how we've always done it. We need a number of years. It helps us to screen, right? And helps us to like sort through the candidates, understand who can do the job. But does a year of experience really tell you that? Think about folks now, you know, we had the example of people who are coming out of college, the degrees, right? Think about people who are coming out of college, just got their degree. Think about high school graduates, right? Our education system is supposed to be preparing our youth to be able to come into the job market. But then they come and apply for jobs or try to apply for jobs and they see something like this 3 years experience, 5 years experience. They're automatically excluded from that, even though some might argue that they're probably best situated because they're closer to the education process where we're learning how to think critically, project manage, um, uh, synthesize a lot of material and information that comes at us quickly, right? So um, we might say that they might be really skilled and at a really great time in life to come on board in our workforce, but we've excluded them already. So think about that. How are we narrowing our candidate pool before we even need anybody, before we even interview anyone? And that's important because, you know, I'm not saying that someone from high school would be the best suited for our this job, right? But we don't even know because we never get to meet them. We never get to meet them. So I created an example and I just said demonstrated experience. So I took out 3 years and I just put demonstrated experience creating results driven frameworks that measure outcomes for individuals, children, families, and communities that are demographically and geographically disaggregated. So I didn't really have to change much. I just took out this really strict, really narrow requirement, opened it up so that whoever fills this role has to demonstrate how they do that. You can create interview questions that get at the demonstrated commitment, demonstrated experience are in the second column, the right column. You can create your interview questions based on trying to ascertain whether someone has that knowledge, has that skill, has that competency, so that the person that you get, you feel satisfied can do that work. But our interview process should be done in a way that helps us get to the candidate who's best suited to do the work, not the candidate who meets these kind of arbitrary, I would argue, arbitrary requirements. So this is really important in your position descriptions. And I wanted to spend some time with that. I have another one, demonstrated experience collecting, reviewing, and synthesizing data into compelling narratives for diverse audiences. So just another example of, you know, what the outcomes based. What are the things that you need people to do in the job, right? And then put that in your position description as the requirement, that they can demonstrate that they're able to do these things. And then in your interview process, you are testing to see whether that is the case for the work that you're doing or for the job that you're doing. Let's see, this is another example. Oh, this is one for leadership. So leadership, we have some of the same typically I've seen, and this is another Office of Equity example. So I just want y'all to know that we're a part of this, right? So we're working on how to eliminate our unnecessary biases that aren't helpful in determining who would be really well suited to work in the Office of Equity. And so I'm showing you an example that I think is typical for Washington State, but that came from one of our own previous position descriptions. So we've got the degree requirement, the 3 years experience supervising staff or leading teams. Now, why 3 years? Why not 5, 10 years? Why not 1 year? Right? What is the years of experience guarantee in the person who meets that requirement? I think, you know, you're on the call. I can't see y'all, but you've had supervisors with 20 years of experience. That probably you didn't really have a lot of faith that could actually supervise, right? So what are you actually trying to get to with this requirement? And maybe to say demonstrated experience to leading teams, right? So take out these years of experience requirements. The next one, 3 years paid professional, progressively responsible experience engaging with community to drive forward collective impact to supplement the work to measure outcomes for individuals, children, families, or communities. that are demographically and geographically disaggregated, systematically excluded, or institutionally oppressed. So first, for me, when I've been applying for jobs, words like professional, progressively responsible experience, I don't even know what that means. I'm like, are they talking to me? Do I meet that? I don't know. What could that? I don't know. So let's make it simpler and let's reduce some of these kind of arbitrary requirements and open up our candidate pool. And we'll probably be surprised at the folks who navigate this process as well. I know I have been. So here's some of the examples that I have collected from updated position descriptions. So demonstrated experience supervising and leading teams, demonstrated experience leading change in organizations, demonstrated experience meeting organizational goals and customer expectations, demonstrated experience managing human, financial, and information resources strategically. And then we saw the previous one, a demonstrated commitment to social and racial justice, and then demonstrated ability to discuss issues and topics of racism, anti-Black racism, social justice, disability justice, and belonging, to name a few. So for the Office of Equity, the most important thing for me is that anyone who comes into our office understands that our systems aren't fair and that can I was able to have conversations and dialogue with people around that. So that's why I have that last bullet, the demonstrated ability to discuss issues, because oftentimes when I'm hearing feedback from folks, well, it's hard to have these conversations. Yes, it's hard, but at the Office of Equity, I mean, we're supposed to be modeling the way and helping other folks do it. So everybody in our office has to be able to have these conversations, or at least get the conversation going, right? So that's why I have that last bullet. And we talked about the bullet above it on the last slide. And all the top 4 bullets are really getting toward the type of leadership competencies that are important for me in our office, especially because our office is supposed to be supporting agencies in navigating change. So for me, any leader in our office has to have experience and the ability to lead change within our agency and broadly within Washington State. So if you can see that for me, the bullets on the right-hand side are ones that allow folks to really reflect within themselves and think about how they may be able to meet these requirements, versus on the left-hand side, it's very black and white. It's very binary. Either you do or you don't. But I would argue that on the left side, you're not sure if that's what's going to get you, what you want in the outcome. Okay. So on your own for 10 minutes, practice writing or editing position description requirements to be more outcomes focused. So if you have, you could even, maybe I'll go back to the last slide for the left-hand column, and you practice writing your own outcomes-based focused job requirements. This is for position descriptions. So we'll give you 10 minutes, take some time doing that. And I'll also be responding to any questions that may be in the chat.
All right. Hopefully folks can hear me. I just wanted to introduce myself. I got stuck in traffic, so I was a little bit late, but I've been with Megan kind of in the chat a little bit and just giving you some context as to when I'm saying we or us in state HR. My name is Michaela Doelman. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I lead the state HR team. I've been there for a little over a year, since August of 2022. But as Megan mentioned, we're partnering with the Office of Equity to look at what do job requirements look like and what are kind of the barriers in the recruitment process, to try and figure out how we can make it a more formal and standardized across the enterprise, to say we want to remove those barriers and implement best practices so that you who are writing those position descriptions have ways of finding qualified candidates, and that our class and comp structure is supportive of that. I will be speaking a little bit later, but I'll turn it back over to Megan to lead the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Michaela. You all cracked me up. I saw in the chat, someone said, I'd love to know the conversation happening. And we are just, me and Michaela we're just nuts. We have a good time. Okay, so job announcements. So this is now you've written the position description focused on being as outcomes focused and targeted as possible. And now you'll translate that to your job announcement. So that's what we want to talk about next. And what I want to focus on right now is how to make it exciting. So in government, and I guess taking it back a little bit is we are in an employee market. I have been hearing from agencies that we can't find any candidates. It's hard for us to hire. You know, no one's applying for our jobs. And partially, I think it's we have been willing to move enough to compete in this job market, in this employee market. Before we had people applying all the time, so we didn't, you know, we could just keep to what we were always done. We didn't have to really worry about changing things because we would always knew we'd get people that could apply. But now everyone's competing, right? The boomer generation is starting to retire. We've talked about this for it feels like decades, right? Oh, what happens when the boomers retire? They're the largest workforce, and we're gonna have to have people who can, you know, fill those positions afterwards. Well, it's here. We're in it right now. That's happening. You've also got the people being burned out from COVID and the social justice fights happening around the world. The fact that our jobs don't pay enough for people to live, the high cost of living for folks. So we are now competing for people to fill our jobs in a way we hadn't ever had to do before, and we're not necessarily going to be able to compete with pay. So I guess I would challenge, you were talking about HR folks, I would challenge them to think about, if you don't change, who's going to do our work? You know, like we have to change if we're going to fill the positions. The Office of Equity, we haven't been having any issue hiring people. We have to we have to shut positions down early or cut it off at a limit, whatever, because there's so many people applying. And I would argue that I'm just so proud of our talented team. I think that we have an incredible group of people who are bringing such a diverse experience. We have a lot of people from outside of state government, inside of state government, locations across Washington state, because we're remote. So that's another thing. Remote work, please. We have people in Yakima, Spokane, Seattle, Bremerton, all across Washington state. And what does that get us? Well, our team meeting discussions are so rich with our ability to have discussion, and we challenge each other's thinking in a way that helps us produce really amazing things, I think. Now, it's not all perfect, but we can build on top of what it is we're establishing. And so that's one thing I would say to HR folks, or just have them watch it and they can hear me say it, is that if you don't change, you won't have anybody to work in your offices. That's the end result. And by doing this, I don't think we are reducing the quality of the candidates, because everybody's in here. We have no, because as we talked about before, we've got bias, we've got requirements in there, right? But it's more outcomes based, because I can't tell that how we've been writing job announcements gets us the folks who are best suited to do the work anyway. We talked about the example with supervisors, right? You got people, I got 20 years as supervisor, and you wouldn't want to work for them, right? So that's what I would challenge people, is that we don't really have a choice. We have to. Okay, so job announcements. Do you want to say anything? Okay. So let's make it exciting. So job announcements, the introduction. So we've got a first paragraph. People are clicking on jobs, trying on careers.wa or wherever they are. They're going to see, well, what is this job about? What am I trying to do here? And one thing, since we can't compete with pay, are the other things that we offer people, right? And often, you know, people want to do work that is aligned with their values and their principles, that gives them meaning, right? I get to go do this at work. I don't have to talk about the technical things I do, but I get to go do this, right? So on the left hand is a typical job announcement. Again, I'm using our own office equity examples, right? I ain't trying to put anybody else on blast. We can talk about the ways that we need to spice up our own work. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to oversee, manage, you're directly work with, blah, 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 right? I mean, someone might pull out the proactive equity anti-racism PEAR, and they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. But there's not really anything that's like draws somebody in to say, let me see if I really want to apply for this job, right? So on the right-hand side is an impact and mission-focused intro. and it's just one sentence, two sentences, right? The Washington State Office of Equity is seeking a courageous and unapologetic champion of equity and anti-racism to advance belonging and justice in Washington State. We desire a colleague who questions what is to help find solutions for what can be. That's it. And uh, you know, I want everyone to understand too that I don't have the answers. What I'm sharing you is what we've been doing and the feedback we've gotten and the response we've gotten because of what we're doing that encourages me and lets me know that I'm on the right path. So we have gotten such great feedback just on this intro. And folks, oh my gosh, we want to work there. This is credible. I've never seen this before from a state agency. I've never seen government say something like this. And so folks are excited, right? And so even though we may not be able to compete with the pay, we've got people's hearts. They're like, we want to be a part of change because people are seeing things happening in our country, in our world, and they're like, we want to help change in a way that creates space for everyone, where everyone can be valued and appreciated and treated with dignity. So an intro like this really grabs people and pulls them in. Okay, so do you want to say anything about job announcements?
I think what I've noticed about Megan's job announcements or the job announcements in the Office of Equity is that just amplifying what Megan said is oftentimes we want to kind of just put our best foot forward. We want to say in government, oh, here's all the great work we're doing. Come join us. And I don't know how many of you know, but government doesn't always have the best reputation. We're not people who just don't work in government already don't necessarily think highly of us. So there is kind of a strategy in being truthful and saying we know that we need to improve. We know that right now we're not perfect. Here's the challenge. Here's what we're trying to do to solve that problem. Here's what we're trying to do to improve. And we want you to join us to be a part of that. I think that's what Megan is calling out in her job announcements. And what I've seen in other job announcements that are getting people excited is some of that truth telling, because I think people are ready to want to join to help make a change. But if they don't think that we're willing to do that self-reflection and willing to change ourselves, they're like, nope, I'll pass that up, because they don't want to just come and work for a bureaucracy. They want to do something that's going to have meaning.
Great point. Great point. And that's why I'll put in that last sentence. We desire a colleague who questions what is, because oftentimes if you have an employee who's like, why are we doing that? Is there another way to do this? Then they're like, oh, you're a problem employee. And they're like, pushed off to the side, right? Well, I'm saying in order to do systems change that the Office of Equity is mandated to, we need somebody who questions what is. So think about that as well. Okay, on this slide, please practice drafting an exciting impact and mission-focused job announcement introduction. We'll give you 10 minutes for that. I'll show you the previous slide, just so if folks want to kind of use our example and think of your own words, you can. And again, if you have any questions, we'll answer those in the chat. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope that exercise was helpful for you. And now we'll move to the job announcement supplemental question. So actually, I got this idea from Michaela. And do you want to talk about how you came across this? Okay, I'm gonna let Michaela introduce this part.
So what Megan and I were talking about is, for context, I've worked in state government in various HR jobs since 2007, so a little over 16 years. I spent the first almost 6 years working as a recruiter. And part of that was during the recession, but then part of that was when we had a lot of people applying for jobs. And what oftentimes hiring managers would come to me and say, I don't have time to read through all of these job announcements or resumes. We were getting, 50 to the largest we've ever had was 494 resumes that came in. And hiring managers were like, I just don't have time to review. And we wanted to make sure that what I noticed is that the more you get, the more we let our bias creep in because we're reviewing quickly. And so we're looking at the things that jump out to us that are more likely to be attuned to kind of our biases that we are either don't like about someone or like about someone. And so one of the things that we found that could be really helpful is to say, what are the non-starters? What do we need to know about this candidate to know that, like, absolutely they must have this, and if they don't have it, it doesn't matter what else they have on their resume, they cannot do this job. And what we've found, especially since we've committed to the PEAR plan, is that if they don't have an understanding of equity, if they don't have a commitment to learning and growing and continuing on that journey, then it doesn't matter what their technical skills are, they're not going to be a good fit for this job. And so what I was talking to Megan about that I did, Mark, I see you in the chat. Mark was the first hire that I did when I came into the role. And we did have quite a few applicants for his job. And so what we did is we put a supplemental question in there that said, in your own words, which you can see on the screen here, talk to us about, where are you at in your equity journey? What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? And how does it show up in your work? And instead of looking at their education, anything in their application packet, I went straight to the supplemental question. And if they had a good answer, then they moved into okay, I'll review your application in more detail after that. But if they had a bad answer, if they were saying, I like this is a real answer, I enjoy all different types of ethnic foods, was somebody's answer. Or someone else said, well, I married an Asian woman. So, when I see those types of answers, I was like, that's good for you. And you are not at the level that we need you to be at in order to work on our team. And so it was a really easy way to spend, 2 to 3 minutes just kind of digging through, narrowing down the candidate pool to then the 10 to 15 resumes that I could spend more time looking at and really going through to make sure that I didn't let my bias seep in. So I'll turn it over to Megan.
So thank you, Michaela. This has been really powerful for us. And it also kind of supplements the position description with the job requirements that moves you into the job announcement, right? Because you're going to take those requirements from the PD and put them in the job announcement. First, you've already got people excited, right, through your job job announcement intro. And as we were talking about earlier about this interview process should help us help folks opt in who are have the values and the competencies that you're looking for in the position that you're doing. And so this question, this would have been for our director of operations, right? So it's important for me, do you understand how access to financial resources perpetuates social and economic inequality for individuals from social identity groups? We have focused your response on racism, anti-Black racism, disability justice, and social justice in general. I have those focuses there because the Office of Equities is pro-equity, anti-racism. We center racism because it is the root cause of oppression in the United States. So we're always making sure that folks understand how racism has perpetuated oppression in our country. But this question is focused on, do you understand how your job can help perpetuate oppression or advance equity and justice, right? So the person in this job has to understand what they're doing is going to help us meet our mandate to advance systems change in Washington state. And that's really important because oftentimes when we're talking to folks, we're like, hey, do you know what's your role to play in advancing equity and justice in Washington state? And people are like, oh, I thought that was your job, Megan. You're the director for Office of Equity, ain't it? Right. And my thing is, it's a team. I'm relying on y'all to do your part to advance equity and justice, and I will do my part. We're a part of a team, though. It's never going to be one person because every decision each of us make maintain the current status quo, right? And our status quo is oppression. So if you're not doing your role, then none of us are going to be successful in advancing equity and justice. So the Office of Equity, I want someone who understands how what they do in our office is going to advance equity and justice, because I need that level of awareness. I need that competency. Plus, that also goes to some of those job requirements about, do you have a demonstrated commitment? Do you have an understanding? Now, this is an opportunity to see where their mind is at. And like Michaela was saying, if this question doesn't generate a response that is sufficient, then I don't really care what other else you can do, right? Because if you can't use what you're going to do with the lens that you have then you're not going to be helpful to me. You're going to be harmful to us and what our office is trying to achieve. So this is the question that I developed. And I'm going to tell you, first when Michaela was like, hey, Megan, you should do this. And I was like, Michaela, that's never going to work. How am I going to do this? Right. We're getting so many applications. And I tell you, I kid you not, it is the quickest way. And I think it's been the most powerful way to screen out candidates to move forward to interview, is this question. And like Michaela says, I look at this first, the supplemental question response, before I look at anything else in the application. And this has been the easiest way for me to move people through, because you're just looking at everyone's answers, right? And I put 150 words, so I don't do the essay now, because if people write you pages of stuff, then you'll be there forever. You don't want that. So you got to limit what they are, how much they write. And if you give me 300 words, then that's not even a thing, right? That's now you're not following directions. I need 150 words because I need you to understand. I'm not looking for a dissertation. I don't want you to regurgitate whatever article you've seen. I need to know, do you understand in a way that you can clearly and quickly speak to this issue? So it's just been mind-blowing to me. So we'll get, 180, 100 candidates for jobs, and I go here, and it only takes me like 2 hours to get through, because I'm, maybe doing other stuff too. 2 hours, and then I've got a list of folks that I looked in at their resume and the job experience to move forward. So I just want to share that with you all. And now, oh wait, I think I had, did I have something? Okay, I might, maybe not. Okay, so so the next slide says, on your own, take 10 minutes to practice drafting a summary question focused on assessing the equity lens of your candidates. Oh, and here's Michaela.
As you're writing, just wanting to get ahead of a question, a lot of times people will say, well, what if HR is telling me that I can't do that I have to look at the resume, or I have to look at the application as a whole before I can do that? What I can say, again, I'm working as a recruiter for 6 years. As long as you treat every candidate the same, and as long as you're assessing the application based off of qualifications, you can say, this is how this is related to the job, then this actually passes the muster of anytime someone's going to question the way that you review applications. What we've done in the past is I create a matrix, and I'll just say, first round is looking at this supplemental question. This is how this supplemental question is related to the job. Again, in state HR, for us, every position needs to have an equity lens, because we're here to support pro-equity, anti-racism work. So it is related to the work that we're doing. We have it in our strategic plan, so we can show, here's the business of our work. Here's how every position needs to be at least capable of answering this question to a certain degree. And then we're assessing every candidate in the exact same way. Everyone gets a chance to be assessed. And so this is actually very much in alignment with how we were doing it, same as if you were to assess everyone for a bachelor's degree. Actually, in my opinion, more related to the work than if you were to assess every candidate for a bachelor's degree. So if HR were to question you on why you're assessing this way, I could tell you that it does pass the muster.
All right, everyone. Hope that exercise was helpful for you. Our next portion focuses on screening candidates now. So we've gone through position description writing, job announcements in a way that's exciting, and that will help you screen through the initial applicants to screening. So on this slide, I have the example. So that job announcement screening question, or some little question that we had before. So this is the same question at the top of the screen. And I have 2 examples of responses that we received. And so based on what you heard me say about the importance of the financial resources and how it's perpetuating, or access to financial resources, and how that perpetuates social and economic inequality, here's a couple of examples of some questions we received. And we said focus your response on racism, anti-Black racism, and the other ones I can't see because it's blocked by the little screen, our camera here. So the first example, access of certain knowledge or lack of it leads to an inability of the group impacted not be able and gain access to financial resources, which therefore continues the cycle of that group. As with any group that does not have the particular knowledge or skill set of this gap is not filled, this cycle will be constant and affect more generations, having seen this occur over generations and still to continue as a challenging circumstance to be around. So this is my assessment as I'm reading this, right? I don't see this as a strong response. Why? Because it puts all the onus on the group. Access to certain knowledge, lack of knowledge. Knowledge is important, but there's also things that we do, right? So I want to understand how is the system, so it's people's access to financial resources, but how is the system creating access or not access to different groups of people? I also said focus your response on racism, anti-Black racism, and this one is just a general response. There are differences if you understand the history in America, how we have targeted certain groups across our history, and limited their ability to access opportunities. So it's not necessarily knowledge is a part of the process, but sometimes it's not knowledge. We think about Jim Crow era, right? Where it said if you're Black, you can't get a low interest mortgage to buy a house. You can't go to college. So it's not that these groups didn't know about it. It's not that they didn't have the knowledge about it. Our systems blocked their access. So that is that to me, this first example is not a great answer because they don't understand the structure. And when we're having conversations about structural oppression, and Office of Equity is here to change systems, right? You have to understand that it's the systems. It's not what individual people or people groups can do. Because if you ask them, they already know what the problems are. They know, right? Now, the people who we are state employees have power to create policies, systems. We create structure. We create the structures that then either give them access or not access. So access in this instance is about people's knowledge. It's about your understanding of your role and how you're going to perpetuate oppression. So this next answer, very long. That's already not great for me, right? Because you're not listening to directions. They're talking about theories, right? So they're talking about practitioners of this theory, that theory, this theories in general, for identifying problems and solutions for DEIB related issues, operationalize community-based participatory research methods to engage. Okay, this is great, right? They love community, they're focused on community. That's not answering the question. It's not answering the question, right? It sounds really fancy, right? Oh, look at all these little fancy things, right? I should be like, oh, but they didn't answer the question, right? So I appreciate that they want co-creation. They're basically talking about, I will engage community to co-create the solutions together. That's great. For this answer, I need you to understand how this role is going to help us, or how we have perpetuated oppression against certain groups of people, because so that you can co-create in a way that actually gets us to the solutions. To just go to the community and say, hey, tell me what to do. You have to help guide that process. So these are examples that I put on here just to show you the way that my lens is working. You will have a different lens, right? And like Michaela was saying, it's fine. As long as you apply that lens to everyone the same way, it's fine. So as you look through your responses, think about, what am I looking for? And how am I making sure I'm holding everyone to the same kind of expectation? The next slide is an example, is the third example. This one I liked. The caste system in the United States impacts the financial resources available to every group in the country, whereby white folks have access to the most financial resources. Not all, right? But most. Non-Black people of color benefit from anti-Blackness that afford them more financial resources than their Black counterparts, but still are negatively impacted by the racist systems that ultimately limits access to opportunities for access to quality food, employment, home ownership, education, physical and mental health for any group that is not an able-bodied cis white male. This is beautiful, right? Because even those two, I'm like, ah, you know, it's like, ah! This is great because they understand too, when we talk about rural communities, right? We talk about poor white people. They're like, well, we're not benefiting. And this sentence is like, exactly, right? Um, we have more financial resources, you have access to more financial resources, but you're still negatively impacted. Racism is bad for everybody. Racism is bad for everybody. And this sentence explains that, right? And then they have additionally the impact results in unequal access to business loans and other lines of credit. Talked about that earlier. Unequal access to business contracts and more. We see that in even our state contracting processes. Who gets access to our contracts? Who gets approved for the contracts and who doesn't? The harmful practices have created food deserts, increased illness from hazards and undue stressors, as well as disparities in essential and life-preserving saving resources, creating the vulnerability in BIPAC, disabled, and LGBTQIA plus communities. Beautiful, beautiful answer. So, and now I get to pass it to Michaela.
All right, thanks, Megan. So the other part of application review is actually once you get past the supplemental questions and you're looking at the job announcement and looking at resumes in comparison. And this is a real life announcement. It should still be online right now. It's the director of the Employee Assistance Program, also known as EAP. I think many of you are familiar with it. Darrow, who was leading that group, is now over at the Department of Health doing amazing work over there, but that job is open. And so I used to work with that team, so I'm fairly familiar with what the work does, which I think is helpful as we kind of walk through. But if you'll look at the job announcement, what you'll see is some of the duties. So this person is officially manning the EAP business operations. So EAP is a business. We actually, as a state, we contract with kind of mental health practitioners across the state, and we pay them per visit. So when an employee of the state or one of their adult family members goes and seeks a counselor, we pay them for that. So we have to manage that operations to make sure that we're getting the billing on time, that we're paying them, and that we collect a certain amount through the personal services fee, and then we also have a fee for service for other clients. That whatever we're collecting, because it truly is a business where they have to manage profits and loss, so they need to make sure that they're financially stable throughout the year. In addition to overseeing that business operation, they oversee the contracts of all those providers. They have to do the budgeting, they do the marketing, because even though EAP, like many people know about it and they just come to it, we also want to make sure that it's utilized, because if people aren't using the services, then it's not a well-run business. They're also like re-looking at, what is their service model, because right now the way that they charge for businesses, other entities like University of Washington to use it, they charge it based off of a assumption that they're going to have, I forget what the exact percentage, but I think it's like a 3% utilization rate. So it's a percentage of the total FTE count. And they're constantly analyzing, like, is that a financial stable model? So it really is like a true business that they're overseeing. And then you'll see the qualifications down below are a master's degree from an accredited university. Ideally, you do want someone who understands what mental wellness, so psychology, counseling, social work, that they have that background. But they're also saying, we're willing to look at business administration or public administration or something related. Since this is a director level position, they were saying 5 years of experience, and then professional experience supervising staff. Since EAP does have a staff, I think of about 8 people who are both clinicians as well as intake specialists. So if that is the job announcement, we're going to quickly look through 2 different resumes. Yeah.
And based on what we've talked about earlier, right? We could think about how could we rewrite some of those qualifications in a way that doesn't exclude people. Maybe the person who actually could do this job the best.
Yeah. So I think we talked about, maybe a master's degree, especially if you have a degree in counseling or psychology. Oftentimes, in order to practice, you need a master's degree. But do you really need a master's degree in business to be able to run an EAP program? Or are there other ways that you could have gained that experience? Are there other ways that you could have gained clinical work experience? So really looking at those degree requirements to say, is that necessary? So we're now going to look at 2 different resumes to just kind of, and we'll have you assess on your own, but having been a recruiter, I'm going to walk you through kind of what I see the biases showing up in the recruitment process, just to get all of you to kind of see how it might show up in the application screening process. So this first resume, and these are made up, but the first resume shows that the person has a bachelor's degree from UCLA, an MBA from Harvard, and a PhD from Oxford University. Oops. Their employment experience, they have been an HR director at a state agency for the past 3-ish years, where HR has that connection to employee or EAP. Oftentimes, HR is who you go through in order to get access to EAP. You could see that they also worked as an employee wellness manager within a state agency. And in that portfolio, they had employee mental wellness and well-being responsible. So there's that tangential connection to the EAP program. And then they also, prior to working for state government, they worked as a mental health counselor. So on the kind of compared to, let me go back, compared to what we're looking for in the qualifications, they have their master's degree, they have 5 years of professional experience related in some way, and they have professional experience managing staff. So they meet all of their required qualifications. Now, if you look at this second resume, the person has a bachelor's degree from the Evergreen State College. They have a master's degree in mental health counseling from Oregon State University. And then if you look at their experience, the most recently and for a number of years, almost or 8 years, they were the CEO of a small nonprofit. And that was responsible for kind of successful operations and oversight. You'll see that they've talked about increasing the number of people served as well as the number of grants received, which if you've ever worked in nonprofit work can be difficult and challenging. That they were an operations manager. So they were within the nonprofit, managed the operations, and then promoted up to the CEO. And then prior to that, they were a mental health counselor. So if we go back to the job announcement again, you'll see that both candidates meet the qualifications. What I can tell you, having been on numerous interview panels, having worked with, I think honestly at this point I can say hundreds of hiring managers, candidate number one will show up as the most qualified. I've seen hiring managers and heard hiring managers talking about like, wow, this person went to Oxford. They must be amazing. Or they've got a PhD. That must be better than an MBA because, it's one more degree. What I've also seen showing up as biases in the higher assessment process is, oh, well, they've worked in state government before. They know how state government runs. And so they're more likely to have that connection to understand and be successful in HR. And the second candidate won't show up as qualified because their schools are not as prestigious. Their experience is not in government. And we have a huge bias in state government to looking at people who have previous government experience. But I'm just going to go back one more time. And if you look at the job duties again, this is someone and I know this because I used to work with the team. You don't need to be a clinician. There are times because Darrow and the previous person who led the team were clinicians that they would see people, but that's not how EAP is run. We have clinicians on site in case there's an incident that needs urgency, but otherwise that's why they have the network of clinicians that they refer to. The job is to oversee the business. The job is to maintain financial wellness, to be able to ensure that whatever we're charging makes up for how much we're paying out each time, and to supervise the staff. And if you really think about it that way, an HR director, I've been an HR director in a number of agencies. We don't manage profit and loss. We don't manage business operations. We do manage staff, but a small, where is it? A nonprofit CEO, this person is actually they have more related experience to EAP. They have the master's degree in what you need a master's degree for, but they've run a business. They've done grant writing. They know how to manage profit and loss. They know how to manage staff. They know how to look at operations. And so this is just wanting to show you an example. I see this happening all the time where managers we talked about, your biases, and only you know what your biases are. Some of you may say, oh, I actually don't prefer people who work in state government because of the work that I do. Maybe your bias is to prefer someone who works outside of state government, and you might be missing someone whose most recent experience is actually not working for them because they've worked in state government. So the point of this is to recognize that we all have biases and we all let them show up in how we review resumes. And that the best way to mitigate your biases is to really go back through looking at the requirement or at the duties and saying, first of all, like Megan was saying, are these the right requirements? Is this really what's necessary to be able to do this work? And if not, what should the requirements be? So what I would say is, yeah, maybe a master's degree is a way that you can demonstrate experience, but I would also look for someone who's overseen a business operations, who's managed profits and loss, who's been able to demonstrate financial health in their organization and found efficiencies in their business processes, or maybe brought on new software, because that's something I know that the EAP is doing. Those are the demonstrated experiences that I would look for as the requirements. And then when I'm reviewing the applications, then I can look through and say, okay, then this second resume actually comes out because it's more related to the work of showing up as more qualified. So just wanting to show you all an example, but really what I would say is the best thing that you can do for yourself, since it is so job specific, is to first and foremost understand what your own personal biases are, because they're going to be very unique to you, and make sure that you have a way to kind of keep those in the forefront and make sure that you're mitigating those as you assess. And then going through like we talked about before, going through your position description and your job announcement and making sure that the qualifications are truly related to what you need in that job. And if you are, if a degree is required, that you're offering multiple pathways to demonstrate that, yes, you can earn it through a degree, but you can also earn it through demonstrating these abilities or having this other type of experience. I'll hand it back over.
Thank you. Look forward to the next. That's okay. Mm-hmm.
Oh, to the left. Okay. There we go. Sorry.
So we just have, this is our last slide. We just have some additional tips. Where are you advertising your recruitment? Is it passive or intentional? So in the state, we'll say, well, we put it on careers.wa.gov. Well, who looks at careers.wa.gov? And there are hundreds, probably thousands of job postings there. How are they going to find yours? Right? So for me, one thing I did, okay, now don't clown me, or that means laugh at me. Don't tease me. Clown is tease for you. Don't tease me about this, but I was really proud of the fact I've been doing really good on trying to build up my LinkedIn professional network. Apparently, the younger generation, they don't look at LinkedIn. So when I said that to my team, they laughed at me. Just putting it out there. But anyway, but what is your network? How can you utilize your own network that's not attached necessarily to the agencies to spread the word, right? Because now the thing about access to knowledge is important. It is about who knows about your posting. That's the pool that you have with which to get your candidate pool. So are you being passive or are you being intentional? We're now starting to advertise and pay for advertising with the historically Black colleges, other colleges of color, news, advertisement postings and articles and things like that, newspapers and stuff. We're looking at how we can build that out further. There's businesses, professional networks that you can pay to advertise your postings on. So right, put your money where your mouth is, right? Be more intentional about your advertisements. Who's on your interview panel? What does an intentionally diverse panel look like for your job? And then who is making the final decisions and why? And how are they make sure they have an equity lens, right? They're thinking about it from more of a broad perspective on the competencies, who has the competencies to do the work that we're asking in our agency, and being on your panel, doing an anti-bias assessment, making sure folks, you can even look at the Harvard assessment and people can just understand their own maybe biases, and then just have more discussion and dialogue about it, right? Like bias is not bad. It can be bad if you're not aware of what it is, right? So like we all do it. It's how our brains, if you studied your brains and how it processes, we all have bias. Our brain catalogs and categorizes things without our understanding, and we can't help it sometimes. your responsibility as a human being, as part of the hiring process and the state employees, is to understand your biases so that you can, where it's not fair, mitigate it, right? And then what interview questions do you ask? How do you embed and evaluate equity? One of the questions I've used in the past, probably won't continue using it, but I thought it's been really good. And I've heard people ask the why are people poor question that somebody used in their supplemental answer or supplemental question. They've asked that in their interview process. I think that's phenomenal, right? Because you're getting at what do people think? Because what you think is what you're going to bring as you do your job. I've asked this since 2020 and COVID and the murder of George Floyd. What have you done to further your anti-racist journey? It's incredible that we've gotten this far in the last 3 years in our country, and some people still are like, well, we just want to learn more. That's where we are. And so I would say, and I think Michaela spoke to this, as equity should be the requirement for anybody to work in Washington state employment. I don't care what you're doing, right? All of us have a role to play in advancing equity and justice. And so embed equity and not just say, what do you think about equity? How do you define it? That's too basic, because we need people to have a lens that understands that it's about the systems of oppression, and then each one of us in our roles is going to perpetuate oppression or advance equity. So you need to be answering questions to get at people's lens, like what do they think? Why are people poor? That's a great question, right? So think of some questions like that. Be bold, try new things, get creative, right? I don't have the answers. We don't have the answers, but we're trying to learn, we're trying to understand, we're trying to implement when we can. And we're like, ooh, I had so many different ways to try to limit my candidate pool. I tried 3 or 4 and I would talk, Michaela, what do you think about this? She's like, I don't think that's gonna work. And I will, we'll try it and we'll see. And I just kept trying and trying and trying. And so just try new things. Now you want to make sure you can meet the laws. Michaela, I don't know all that stuff, but that's why I talked to her. So talk to your HR person, like what really between these clear lines, what can we do? And be thinking about how you interpret what the law says, right? Because sometimes that's the barrier too. But within that, what can we do to try new things and get people interested and excited to apply to our jobs? So that's our time this morning with you. I'm really grateful for the engagement, your ideas. We think we got some good, helpful stuff back from you all. And we're on a break now. And I think the next session starts at 9:55. So have a great rest of your day. Okay, see you later.